Hey guys, Tom here. Happy Friday. Summer's winding down, but happy hour Friday. Welcome to the weekend. Today, we're going to try something a little different on happy hour. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was figuring out what I wanted to do this week, I was looking up a couple of things, and I basically found the history of this drink, and I just really found it fascinating. So I figured I'd share it with you, tell you this story, and make some drinks along the way. And the drink that I'm talking about today is the daiquiri. Now, when most of us think of daiquiri, we think of the big, slushy, fruity, sweet drink that they serve at the cabana bars and the tiki bars, and we'll get to that. But the daiquiri really is an interesting drink with an interesting history. The daiquiri started around the 17th century. There was naval conflicts in the Caribbean between Great Britain and Spain, and during that time, British sailors were given a gallon of beer per day as part of their ration. And not only were the sailors just getting drunk, but beer became hard to get. So what they did was they substituted the gallon of beer for a pint of rum. And that worked out better, but you know, they figured a little more sober sailor would be a better fighter. And along came this man named Admiral Edward Vernon. They called him Old Grog. This was in the 1940s. This was in the 1740s. And what he did was he ordered the rum to be diluted a little bit with some water and citrus juice. And not only did that dilute the rum, but with the citrus in there, it also helped fight off the scurvy, which was popular in the time. Not popular, but rampant in the time. Yeah, the sailors were a little more sober, and they hoped it would give them a fighting edge, but it didn't. Spain prevailed and started to colonize in the Caribbean. Well, around the end of the 1800s, America decided, you know, we don't like that. We have this thing, it's called the Monroe Doctrine. And what the Monroe Doctrine was, it was the opposition, I guess it was from President Monroe, the opposition of European colonization in the Caribbean. So US told Spain, say, listen, you got to get out of here. And they didn't. So along comes the Spanish-American War around the end of the 1800s. Along with that, Cuba sought its independence from Spain. And that was all kind of how this came to a head. So here comes good old Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. They landed in Cuba on a place called Daiquiri Beach. And ultimately, America won the war. They beat back Spain. And Cuba got its independence from Spain. I think that's when they got it, after that war. But what happened was, America just became like Spain. They just set up shop in Cuba and started profiting off of the Cubans. And what was around in Cuba was iron mining. And so they say, you know, this is just one theory, but it's the most prevalent one I could find. During this iron mining time, there was a man named Jennings Cox. And what he did, he was like one of the first big miners in the area. And what happened, he had a party one night, and he had a bunch of friends over, and he was feeding them gin, but he ran out of gin. So what he did was he went down to the local store, and all they had was rum. So, all right, what am I gonna do with rum? Well, what he's gonna do with rum is he mixed it. So he took the rum and he put some rum in there, and he's like, well, I don't know, what else can I do with the rum? I don't know, I'll put some sugar in there. So he put a little sugar in, put in some lemon. He got this concoction and he mixed it all up. And then he got a big old glass of crushed ice. And he poured all the rum and the lemon into the crushed ice. And what he did was he topped it with mineral water. And he made this in big bowls. And he actually made a punch out of it. And then he served it in cups to his guests. They would put, they just put it in a big punch bowl with a ladle, and probably back then they had the silver cups or whatever. And that is why iron miner Jennings Cox is credited with the invention of the daiquiri. A reason why this drink, they say, yeah, Jennings Cox invented it, but they were drinking these kind of drinks for a long time, because the tradition in Cuba was 1 sour, 2 sweet, 3 strong, and 4 weak, which we kind of have in a little different proportions. So how did this drink get from Cuba to us? Well, in that same time, there was a military man. His name was Admiral Lucius Johnson, and he was a Navy doctor, and he spent time in Cuba, and he just loved this drink, or a version of this drink anyway. And when he came home, he told the bartenders at the Army-Navy Club in Washington, and there was another a bar he went to in Baltimore. He told them about this drink, and they started making this drink. Well, the drink started to spread, and bartenders fooled with it, and it was served kind of like this, more as a single drink rather than a punch. They took the mineral water out, because if you have it on ice, the melting ice is going to give you your weak quality. Well, in the 1930s, this drink really took off. And strangely enough, it was through literature. And how this took off was, first, in the 1920 book, This Side of Paradise, author F. Scott Fitzgerald, they say, is the first literary reference to the drink, the daiquiri. But also, and probably more notably, was but none other than Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway had a big impact on this drink. But he didn't necessarily make it like this. What you may not know about Hemingway is he was a diabetic, so he couldn't drink like the sugary stuff. So he actually had his own version of this drink called the Hemingway Margarita, or the Papa Doble. So what he did was he put a stiff portion of rum, double the portion, that's where you get the Doble from, and he omitted the sugar because, like I said, he was a diabetic. So what he did was he added some different things. First, this is where we get whereas Jennings Cox had the lemon in his drink, old Ernie, he put lime in his. And another thing he did was he put grapefruit juice in. Why, you ask? Well, I don't know. But he wanted to get some different flavors in there because, like I said, he couldn't drink the sugar because of his diabetes. So what he did was he added something called Maraschino Liqueur. And you can get Maraschino Liqueur if you want, but I don't know many things that you use it in. But the thing about Maraschino Liqueur, it's not like maraschino cherries. It's actually liquor that's made with the cherry pits, so it's actually kind of nutty. So I came up with a little bit of a cheat on Maraschino Liqueur, because with the nuts, they ferment the seeds to the cherries, so it gets that nutty flavor, but it also gets a little bit of bitterness. So what I'm gonna do, I just put a splash of amaretto in there to give me the nutty quality. The grapefruit's gonna give you that bitter taste, but I'm just gonna add just 1 drop of bitters, just to be sure. So Ernest Hemingway put all that in a glass. He put a little bit of ice in it. He shook it up. If he had a strainer, he'd strain it. But since I forgot to bring a strainer out, we still need a lime because it's still a daiquiri. And that was the way that Ernest Hemingway drank a daiquiri. So fast forward a few years to the next chapter in the daiquiri story. The war was over, and well, it was coming to, actually it wasn't coming to an end. The war was probably in its height. And around that time in 1938, there was a man named Fred Waring. And Fred Waring had a very profound impact on the history of the daiquiri. And what Fred did was, he invented the electric blender. So now the light has just gone off in your head, I'm sure you know. So what the blender did is it allowed us to pulverize ice and fruit and puree fruit at the same time. So people, you know, not only did it elevate the drink, but purists would say it hurt the drink as well, because depending on who you talk to, the true daiquiri is a very delicately flavored drink. And the way that Fred allowed us to make it was it just became this sweet, slushy, you know, the thing you get at the tiki bar. So after the war ended, whiskey was hard to get. At the same time that Fred invented his blender, rum became more popular. So people were just mixing it all together. They put some rum, they put some lime, they put some sugar, they got whatever kind of fruit they had. They put it all in a blender. And thanks to Mr. Waring, so cheers to Fred Waring for giving us the frozen fruit daiquiri. So we've almost come full circle. People drank these slushed up daiquiris and the Hemingway daiquiri, not so much Mr. Cox version, but around the 1990s or so, bartenders were becoming more in tune with going back to basics in their drink making. They were getting away from using the prepared bottled cocktail mixes and the preserved stuff, and they were getting back to more fresh juices, different flavored liqueurs, bitters, and just the basic things that make a good cocktail a good cocktail. So what they did was they went back to the start. They got rum, fresh lime juice, a little bit of sugar, because after all, a true daiquiri is really nothing more than a good rum sour. It's rum, it's sugar, it's lime juice, and whether you like it the way Mr. Jennings made it or the way the bartenders of the 90s made it, the classic American daiquiri is a great little drink. That's it for me. So here's to all the men who helped give us this great American cocktail, or Cuban cocktail, whether you choose to believe any of the stories. So here's to Jennings Cox, Teddy Roosevelt, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and even Fred Waring. So until I see you next time, guys, remember, take care of yourself and your home. Cheers.